Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gary Mond. I'm the chairman of the National Jewish Assembly, and it's my great pleasure to welcome back to the NJA Dr. Tuvia Book, who some of you might remember spoke to us last January. He was talking then, he's going to talk again tonight about Gaza through the eyes of an IDF combat medic, 1 year on from the beginning of the war. Tuvia is a great friend of the NJA. Not only did he speak to us nearly a year ago, he was also our host when we did a tour of southern Israel in February last year. And so he's been very supportive of us. So I'm just going to briefly introduce Tuvia, and then I'm going to hand matters over to him, and he'll speak for between 20 and 30 minutes, and then we'll take questions. So Tuvia was born in London. He was raised in both the UK and South Africa. After he made Aliyah when he was 17 and studied in yeshiva, he volunteered for the IDF, where he served in an elite combat unit. Upon his discharge, he completed his BA at Bar-Ilan University, as well as certification in graphic design. He then served as the information officer at the Israeli consulate of Philadelphia, while earning a graduate degree in Jewish studies. Upon his return to Israel, Tuvia graduated from a course of study with the Israel Ministry of Tourism and is a licensed tour guide. And of course, the NGA have had fantastic experience of Tuvia as a tour guide. Oh, and by the way, we're going to be doing another trip to Israel in January, and we hope to procure Tuvia's services for that as well. Tuvia's been guiding groups for Birthright Israel since its inception. And in addition, he's lectured throughout North America, Australia, Europe, and South Africa. He served as a shaliach for the Jewish Agency for Israel, as the Director of Israel and Zionist Education at the Board of Jewish Education of Greater New York, the Jewish Education Project there. He's also a lecturer and educational guide at the Alexander Muss Institute for Israel in Israel for over 10 years. Tuvia has lectured also at both the Bar-Ilan University and the Hebrew University, and he's the author and illustrator of the internationally acclaimed Israel Education Curriculum for the Sake of Zion, a curriculum of Israel studies, and also Moral Dilemmas of the Modern Israeli Soldiers. And he has a doctorate in Israel education. Tuvia's latest book, Jewish Journeys, the Second Temple Period to the Bar Kokhba Revolt, was published earlier this year. So let me now hand over to Tuvia. Tuvia, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, good evening. So I don't think any of you will be too surprised to be hearing the King's English mixed with a tinge of South African. But what's incredible for me is I'm back here over a year later, and we're still carrying on, and we still don't have our hostages all back. We're still fighting. And who would have thought a year ago I would still be here a year later? It's quite unbelievable. And the people often ask me, one of the big questions people ask me is the morale still high now a year later? And crazily, it is yes. We have to have a few new recruits into our unit, simply because people are tired, and we have my unit is called the Palmar. In Hebrew, it's called the Plugat Lechima Merkavit Refuit, which means a combat medical evacuation unit. And we're like the cavalry. When soldiers are wounded in the Gaza Strip, we're serving now the north of the Gaza Strip where the battles are raging. We go in and we extract them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak for 10 minutes briefly on what my unit does. Then I've already sent some pictures from the field to Steve, who's going to put them up one at a time. I'm going to talk about the pictures for about another 10 minutes. And then we're going to have a Q&A session where you can ask any questions you would like to ask about what's happening right now, or what our particular unit does, or what the morale and mood in Israel is, and what are going to be happening in the future. It's up to you guys. So let's start with a bit what my unit does, what we've been doing. So our aim, basically, incredibly, is to get a soldier from the time they're wounded in battle to a hospital in less than an hour. So before our unit was created, people thought that was impossible. They didn't think it was actually possible to get a wounded soldier from the field, from the moment they're wounded, in less than an hour to the hospital. That happens due to three things. The first thing, of course, is the absolute professionalism of the crew. So our unit consists of doctors, paramedics, combat medics, and of course combat troops as well to secure the area. The second way it happened so fast is because the incredible technology, the medical technology that we have, which I'm going to talk to you a bit about. And the third way it happened so fast is because of the transportation. So let's start with with what happens when a soldier's wounded inside the battle zone. There's an embedded medic who straight away has to make sure there's no immediate life-threatening result. In other words, if there's arterial bleeding or anything like that, they have to patch them up straight away. They called us in. We come in like the cavalry, and our job, if there's one or multiple wounded, is straight away to do a triage to process what's going on. And second of all, we need to get them out, stabilize them and get them out as fast as we can. Now, if they're seriously wounded, then we have to call in the Sheshesh, which means the 669, which is a search and rescue aerial helicopter unit of Black Hawk helicopters. And they come in, they can only spend about 20 seconds on the ground. I'm going to show you these photos afterwards because it's too vulnerable to be in for longer. And then they're always shadowed on top by Apache attack helicopters to make sure that the evacuation happens in the maximum protection possible. At the same time, we're in the ground working on the wounded soldiers. We also have combat troops in our unit that perform a protective perimeter around us to make sure we can work on them with the maximum protection. Now, as soon as we start treating a soldier, it's all the details are being entered onto a digital iPad. It's called a 101 form. At the same time, as this is happening, the same details are going to the helicopter that's coming in and even to the final hospital destination. So everyone's following the treatment levels. In other words, the moment they're wounded until they get to the hospital, they're being treated the whole way. So for the English people in the audience, which is basically all of you, you might remember the incident when Princess Diana was fatally wounded in the tunnel in Paris. If that would have happened in Israel, she probably would not have died because she would have been treated from the moment she was wounded in the car. She was still conscious, and she eventually died of internal bleeding, basically in the car before she even got to the hospital. In Israel, she would have been treated straight away, and she would still be alive today. So that's basically what happens. From the moment the soldier is wounded, they're being treated, even in the most difficult conditions. If the soldiers are moderate or lightly wounded, we have armored ambulances. We take to the nearest hospitals. In Gaza, it's either Ashkelon, which is the Barzilai Hospital, or Soroka Hospital in Beersheba. Now, in addition to having these digital forms, we also have real blood, not a plasma substitute, but actual blood, which is kept in climate control conditions, and it helps the healing much faster. So if anyone's ever in Israel on any missions and you have O- blood, O- blood, then you stop whatever you're doing and you go and donate that blood, because that's universal donor, and we use it all the time. And every 3 days we have to discard it and get another bunch in as well. And that saves countless lives by using real blood. Other incredible technology that we have is we have a portable scanner for the body. That means a portable digital scanner, so we can see internal bleeding in the field. And there's a whole lot of technology that almost sounds like science fiction, but it's this medical technology that's enabling us to save soldiers' lives in the field. I'll tell you about one story. It's one of our most famous people we evacuated, although we didn't know it at the time. And that is the Israeli singer and actor called Idan Amedi. So this happened already in January. And Idan Amedi plays Sagi in Fauda, if any of you guys watch the show Fauda. He's also quite a famous singer. And when the war broke out last October, that's over a year ago, despite the fact that Idan is 35 years old and is married and has 2 children, is quite famous in Israel, he dropped everything, like many people in my unit, like thousands and thousands of reservists, and went to serve in his unit, which is the combat engineers. They're the ones who blow up the tunnels and blow up buildings in Gaza. And we were called in when there was a massive explosion, and we got in there, our unit, and we saw terrible things. We saw there was already soldiers that were dead on the ground. We saw severely wounded soldiers. And at the same time, we're in a combat zone and under fire ourselves. So we noticed one of the soldiers was passed out. He was unconscious and not breathing. And we didn't even know who it was because his entire shirt had been blown open. His dog tags had been blown off. His whole face was black with damage. And in any other army, he probably would have been left for dead. However, one of the doctors, one of our combat surgeons, and she is, as Groucho Marx famously said, well over 4 foot tall. This little girl, but as strong as you can imagine, this strong woman. She felt that he had a slight pulse, and within a second, we were all on top of this guy. We didn't know who it was, and trying to clear the airway. We have a scope so we can put down their throats, digital scopes, laryngoscopes, all sorts of things. And eventually, against all the odds, we got him breathing manually by using an ambo suction, by pumping the oxygen into his lungs. But when the first helicopter came to pull him out, he wasn't stable, so they flew away. Then the second helicopter came in, he still wasn't stable. We couldn't move him, still unconscious, still not breathing. And they had to call in soldiers. We put out an urgent SOS to see if there's any more helicopters. And the deputy chief of staff had his huge personal Sikorsky helicopter, not the normal Black Hawk helicopters. And he landed in the battle to take out one soldier. Again, no one knew who this soldier was, but it was a soldier in desperate need. So we had him manually breathing, still unconscious, and we got him onto that helicopter. We wrote on his ID form, anonymous 25 years old. He's quite fit. Only when he got to the hospital, and they did the proper DNA in the blood and everything, they saw he was 35-year-old. And they knew what his name was, Dr Medic. And 2 weeks later, you remember him standing in that press conference with his arm in a sling, thanking the medical crew. So that is just one example of a particularly well-known individual who we pulled out. But we're doing this all the time. Just yesterday, we did 2 helicopter evacuations and 7 ambulance evacuations. That's over a year later. And the first question the soldiers always ask when we get them, no matter how bad the wound is when can we go back to our brothers? That's always the first question. It's not how badly wounded I am. It's not, am I going to make it? It's like, when can I go back? And some of them are not going back. They're that badly wounded, but it's always the first question. And whenever we ask them, once we've got them with their morphine and their ketamine, whatever we need, and they're stabilized, to call home so their parents don't get the call from the army. We always say, can you call your mom? And they always go like, no, we'll call dad. And they say, Dad, tell mom that. And it's quite amazing because some of these guys are just teenagers, like 19, 20 years old. They were literally in high school a year or two before that. And some of them are older, the reservists, people in their 30s and 40s with families and kids. And it's quite emotional. On the other hand, the motivation levels of us, the medical evacuation crew, was just as high as it was a year ago. And our unit really is a melting pot. It represents the left wing, the right wing, the religious, the secular, the new immigrants, the veteran Israelis. I just did a survey in our unit last week, and we have people who speak 7 different languages in our unit. We have Brazilian, we have an Argentinian guy, we have a Druze, that's non-Jewish. We have a Christian and Druze soldiers in our unit as well. We, of course, have a lot of Russians. And it's just quite amazing that no one cares what your political background is, your religious background. No one cares. They just care that we're rolling up our sleeves, we're in this together to save as many holy lives as we can. So that, in a nutshell, is what our unit does. Now, what Steve's going to do, he's going to pop on some pictures, and I'll tell you about the pictures, because the pictures we all know paints 1,000 words. And then after this, we'll be open for some Q&A. So let's have picture number 1. So this picture over here is what the helicopter looks like when it lands in Gaza. And in case you're wondering why we wear dust goggles, they're not just for decoration or we can look cool like a North Africa Corps. We actually need them to protect our eyes. This is what's going on when the helicopter's landing to pick up the rescued soldiers. And again, once it hits the ground, it has to be taken off again within 30 seconds. Each one of these helicopters has a doctor and a paramedic on them, and they know exactly where we are in our own treatment. They're following it on their digital pad themselves. They just carry on the treatment seamlessly once we load the wounded soldier onto the helicopter itself. Okay, let's do the second one. So the second one is, let's go back to the young lady. So the second one, this young lady's name is Tal Sarah. Now, when I was in the original army back in the Neolithic period, I think it was back in 1948. Now, when I was in the original army, there was no such thing as female combat soldiers. Of course, we all know in the last 15 years or so, that's quite normal to go to an Air Force base and see a pilot with wings on who's a female. And also in our particular unit, 1 out of 3 soldiers are female soldiers, both combat troops and also combat medics and paramedics and doctors as well. Even some of the combat drivers are female as well. So this young lady here, her name is Tal Sarah. She was in a unit called Karakal, which is a co-ed combat unit on the borders. And why she's famous, even though you couldn't tell because she's super modest about it, is she was one of the crew of the 2 tanks, the 2 all-female tanks back in the 7th of October last year, who literally, those 2 tanks did more against the Hamas than most of the rest of the IDF on that day. when the war first started, when the 6:26 in the morning, they were way down south on the border by Egypt. And as soon as they heard what was going on, they got in their tanks. And before this started, people said, no, females can't be in tank crews. You can't have an all-female tank crew. It's a man's job. And there's a lot of people very cynical about it. These two tanks functioned so well that these 8 women, these warriors, became national and international stars. They basically charged up the border on the main road to where everything was happening. One of the tanks blocked a massive hole in the fence. They were firing shells and machine guns to stop even more terrorists coming to Israel. And another tank single-handedly, basically, burst into kibbutz called Cholit and saved the entire kibbutz. These 2 tanks alone, it's estimated they killed about 100 terrorists on that day. And Sarah told me there was a stage when, in a brief lull in the fighting, when she just said Shema Yisrael, and she called up her parents to say goodbye to them because she didn't think she was going to make it because the terrorists were literally clambering up on the tank. They were running out of ammunition. But through incredible heroism, the ammunition and the fuel people under fire came in and refueled and sent more ammunition into the tank itself. They literally had to run the terrorists over with their tanks, and they fought for 18 hours non-stop. And I interviewed her last week for the Australian Jewish News, and she told me that they did not eat or drink or even go to the toilet in those 18 hours. They were just consumed with adrenaline, and they fought non-stop for 18 hours, saved a kibbutz, and blocked a hole in the border. So all the cynics that say, oh, we can't have an all-female tank, this woman is a living, walking example of a hero of the Jewish people. And she told me that her dream has finally become fulfilled because next month they're actually opening up a reserve unit for female tankers in Gaza. All right, next picture. That's right, number 3. So this one shows, again, the Black Hawk helicopter. It also shows the armored ambulances. Now, they're made by Ford, the American car maker. So in Hebrew, they're called Fordim. And there's other ambulances which are called Dodgim, so you can know who makes those ones as well. So the moderate and light wounded soldiers, they go in the ambulance. The very, very critically wounded, they go in the helicopter in the background. All right, next one. The black and white one. Remember the black and white one for a second, just for a laugh? So that one always amuses me. The guy on the right is not Theodore Herzl reincarnated. His name's Shlomo. He has American, and yours, when you see a beard like that, you always wonder Chassid or hipster. So in this case, he's a quite religious Jewish guy. He's got a magnificent beard. He's 23, American parents. But as soon as I saw him, I said, has anyone ever told you look like, and he said, Theodore Herzl. Everyone tells me that every day. So I got him to recreate the famous balcony pose, but this time leaning on the front end of a Jeep. And the resemblance is uncanny, as we can all see. Anyway, let's move on to the next picture. So this is one of our paramedics. Her name's Marlene. She originally came from the Ukraine. And basically, Marlene is a paramedic. So we have combat medics like myself talking to her. And the paramedics, they spent 1.5 years studying medicine and emergency medicine. In the United States, they're called physician's assistants, and they're incredibly qualified. They move super fast and super knowledgeable. And every ambulance has either a doctor or a paramedic on, in addition to the combat medics as well. We don't say, excuse me, are you a man or a woman? We just take the best trained people, and they're all voluntary. This entire unit is all voluntary because we're all reserve soldiers. Okay, next. So the next adage is, practice makes perfect. Even when we're not on the front line, we just never stop practicing. So here's yours truly putting an IV in one of our officers. We do this all the time. When we're not on the front lines, we have people coming in, training and practice and training and practice. And the idea is eventually you can do it almost on autopilot. Now, a lot of the fighting takes place at night. So at night, you can't stop putting on your torches and looking where the veins are. You almost have to do it by feel. At the end of our combat medics course, we actually did put IVs in whilst blindfolded, which is a bit extreme. But we have these red lights, which are very low light, and sometimes we have a lot of pressure. And if you can't get the IV into the arm because the veins have sunk because of shock, you need to know other places like the ankle where you can get it in as well. So we practice, practice, practice. That's what the army is. It's 90% boredom and 10% adrenaline poisoning. But even in the low times, we're still practicing. All right, next one. So people often ask, what kind of gear are we wearing? So this gear that you can see over here, this is about 35 kilograms of gear that we walk around with the whole time. That's a lot of gear, which is not very good for our spines or our knees, but that's what we have to wear. The vest I'm wearing over here has ceramic plates in the front and the back, which weigh about 8 kilograms each, just the ceramic plates. But they really do stop bullets. Without those plates, the bullet can go right through. The Kevlar helmet on top. Just last week, I was in Bet Halochem, which is the recuperation home for the wounded soldiers in Jerusalem, and I met a special forces person who showed me his helmet with literally where the bullet had hit it, a 5.56 bullet, and the helmet saved his life, literally. So we're happy to wear the 35 kilos of gear, knowing it's going to save our lives. The vest we have over here, the medic's vest, has all our equipment in, the IVs, the tourniquets, everything. We have all the bandages, the burn bandages, and we have to know within nanoseconds which pocket everything's in and to get it out and to start reacting. So that is the equipment that we're actually in Gaza with. And this picture, of course, is taken in North Gaza itself. Okay, the next picture is one of the tanks that we serve with. And as you can see, even now, a year later, they're still proudly raising the blue and white flag, and the patriotism still sky high. We know we've got a work to do, and this is the historical opportunity finally to rid Israel of the forces of darkness. Next picture. So the next one, you might see some people who are not in military uniform. And this is an amazing picture. These are the people with the black shirts, including my cousin Josh Kaplan over here. These are people who live in Modin, the Anglo-Saxons. For some reason, they call them Anglo-Saxons in Israel. Sounds like one of those invading barbarian hordes. But it basically means English speakers. So a bunch of English speakers who made Aliyah, they were too old to serve in the army when they made Aliyah, so they try and help us out whenever they can. So Napoleon famously said an army marches on its stomach. And every couple of weeks, these guys come in, mainly from England, the United States, South Africa, Australia, the English-speaking diaspora, and they make amazing barbecues, or Steve and I called them growing up, braais. They really give us the iron that we're missing quite often in our army diet of tuna and rice. As you can tell by our tents, we don't have permanent kitchens. So everyone does what they can do. There's people that donate equipment we need. There's people that come in and do barbecues. And it really lifts the soldiers' morale to have these guys come in. And for me, it's actually a pleasure to speak English for a few minutes every few weeks. So that's who this crew is over here. So this is the Modern barbecue crew. And everyone is doing what they can do. Even a year later, they're coming and making these amazing barbecues for us on the border itself. All right, next picture. Well, that's another of my famous photo montages. So this is the famous 1967 picture, and this is the 2024 picture in the same pose. But once again, you know, we're there, and it's a few against the many, just like it was in 1967. We'll move on from that one. That's just my brief attempt at humor. The next picture is also compare and contrast, and this is quite an unusual one. This is probably the only picture in the army where you have the same soldier 34 years later on exactly the same beach. So on the left is a slightly skinnier version of me when I was in the regular army with my purple beret in the Gabata unit. And here, as far as I know, at least that's what the Jerusalem Post claimed, I'm the only combat medic who's still in active duty 34 years later. And here I am on the same beach with much better equipment on exactly the same place, the compare and contrast. Okay, next picture.
Tuvia, sorry to interrupt. Could you speak a little bit slower, please?
How slow? Okay. So this next picture is, again, my unit in action. There's a helicopter here in the background. The soldier on the stretcher, this was from a couple of weeks ago, was actually in the K9 unit, or the Okets, it's called in Hebrew. And they're the ones that go in the buildings first. Unfortunately, when the army paused for 2.5 months outside Rafiah or Rafah, when everyone's saying eyes on Rafah, our eyes were more underneath Rafah, especially our hostages. We think we know it's still in these terror tunnels. And they had 2.5 months of booby trap, not just buildings, but entire neighborhoods. So quite often before the infantry goes in, the K9 dog unit goes in, which is a co-ed unit of men and women as well. And they go in to clear the buildings. That's what you're seeing over here. One of the wounded K9 soldiers, whose whole building collapsed on top of them. One of the dogs didn't make it. And we took out another one who's body wounded in the ambulance with his incredible dog as well. And we got to the hospital in Ashkelon, the Barzilai hospital. This wounded soldier came with his dog, the handler and the dog, And the staff said, oh, we don't take dogs in the hospital. So, of course, we just laughed at them or walked in with the dog and the soldier. And then he refused to get onto the bed until his dog had actually had water as well. Just incredible. And they also have full combat gear on the dogs, as well as a camera on their backs. So they can video exactly what's going on. Just incredible connection between man and dog you see in these units. And the last picture, I think I put this special on for the British audience. So this apparently is the way that is also reported. They love the Jews to be weak. The good Jewish boys, the black and white picture in the walls together with his hands up. But when you have a Jew who can actually strong and actually fight for our own destiny, not to rely on the pity of the host nations, but actually can help the Jews once again be in charge of their own destiny. That's the type of Jew, that's the bad Jewish boy that the BBC doesn't seem to like too much. I've noticed that over years and years of reporting on the Middle East situation. So it really seems to be the case here that the only kind of Jews that the BBC and a lot of the mainstream media like are the weak Jews or the dead Jews. But when Jews actually have the tenacity, the chutzpah to actually fight back and not rely on the host nations to be in charge of our own destiny, those are the kind of Jews that the world media doesn't like, and we don't actually care. Because we have to do what's good for us, because people always want to hunt Jews. The question in our history is whether we can hunt back or not. And if you had to go back in history 70 to 80 years ago to the Jews in the camps and say we actually now have a state and people still want to kill us, the difference is that we're in charge of our own destiny, we speak our own language, we have our own army and our own soldiers, they would fall on their faces thinking that can't be. We prayed for that for 2,000 years. But that's what our national anthem says, Hatikva Shnot Alpayim. The hope of 2,000 years, to be a free people in our land. But unfortunately, as we can see, freedom is not free. We have to fight for our freedom, and we are fighting for our freedom. Here we are a year later, still fighting for that elusive peace and security. So that's where I'm going to finish my presentation, because what I'd like to do is open it up to questions from the audience and respond that way. So it's less of a monologue and more of a dialogue. Who's going to moderate this one?
Thank you very much indeed, Tuvia. I'm going to ask the first question, and then the next person who's got their hand up, Gary Ogin. And please, could I ask everyone to start raising their hands now by clicking on the button at the bottom of the screen where it says raise hand. So my question is, I was delighted to hear at the beginning of your presentation that there's such a variety of soldiers essentially in the army, and we don't allow any form of politics to get in the way of working together to achieve the result we want to achieve. I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about the morale of Israeli soldiers at the moment, in your experience.
Okay, well, amazingly enough, it's still sky high. It's not just the soldiers. It's also, we have many, many civilians as supporters. It's not just the kids, the people come in from Manana or from Modin to make us barbecues. There's still soldier rest stands all over the country, especially in the war zones in the north and the south, where civilians come and donate their time and food and love for the soldiers. The morale is still very high. People understand that we haven't finished the job and we have to finish the job. And unfortunately, we paid a high price. Just this last week, we lost 4 soldiers just in Gaza, in my own area, where we just couldn't get to them on time. So soldiers are still dying, the cemeteries are still being filled up, and there's still a job to be finished. And so we understand that. So there's no weakening of resolve. There's no less morale than I'd say even than this time last year, incredibly as it sounds. And you've had people, especially in my unit, have been almost a year in reserves. People with families, people with jobs, that they understand that we don't have a choice. Hebrew it's called Milchemet En Beira. It's a war without a choice, right? There's no one else to rely on. We have to rely on ourselves. We need to get this job finished. So the morale, I'm happy to say, is still pretty sky high. There's no sense of war weariness going on, and we feel like we've got the upper hand. We just got to finish off the job.
Okay, I've got 2 people who want to ask questions. Could the rest of you please start putting up your hands? I'm going to ask Elaine Gray first and then Gary Ogin. Elaine, could you come off mute, please?
She's
Elaine,
on mute.
you're on mute.
There.
You're on mute again, Elaine. Please come off mute. Oh dear.
There. I think I've got it now.
You have.
Okay. Tuvia, I loved your presentation, but tell me, we have a lot of problems in the diaspora with the news media saying that that there are thousands of people being killed by Israeli bombs and things like that. Now, I'm pretty sure it's highly exaggerated. Can you give us any indication about how this is being handled?
Yes. First of all, as our good friend Colonel Richard Kemp says, who again, as we all know, is not Jewish and not Israeli, but he was a member at the British Armed Forces, in fact, the colonel in charge of the forces in Afghanistan. He said, and I'm going to quote him, that there's never been a more moral army than the IDF. And I want to ask him why he's such a big, big supporter of Israel. He says, because when he was little, he was taught that there's right and there's wrong. And unfortunately, today you can't call yourself an anti-Semite after the Holocaust. You call yourself an anti-Zionist instead. And we go out of our way more than any other army, just the amount of SMSs and phone calls and leaflets and humanitarian zones. Believe me, Elaine, if we want to commit genocide, we could, but we don't. Right now, as I'm talking to you, do you know what the IDF is doing inside northern Gaza? They're giving the second round of polio shots to Gazan children. Do you see that anywhere in the mainstream media? And the answer is no. And every statistic that you hear quoted, especially on the BBC, that should be renamed the PBC, the Palestine Broadcasting Corporation, it's all quoted from the Gaza Health Minister, which is basically just a mouthpiece of the Hamas. And they invent numbers. One famous example is very close to the beginning of the war, there was a hospital in Gaza that was a parking lot was hit by an errant Islamic Jihad missile. That evening, they already said within half an hour, the number of dead people was catastrophic. They quoted 342, an exact number within half an hour. Now, even Mohammed Salah on his multi-follower Instagram was quick to report massacres and numbers and this and that. And of course, when the IDF investigated, they found out 14 people were killed, not 342. And it was in a parking lot, not in the hospital, and by their own fire. Unfortunately, as Mark Twain famously said, by the time the lie was halfway around the world, the truth was putting on its trousers. And that, unfortunately, is our problem. They make up these numbers, throw them out, and all the mainstream media just blindly accept them without any type of attempt of independent verification. And by the time the IDF clinically analyzes and finds out how many people actually were killed, it's too late because the lie's already left and is already traveling around the world. So that is the issue. I can tell you that thousands of people have been killed in Gaza, and many of them are terrorists. But they're Hamas-run health industry does not differentiate between who's a terrorist and who's an innocent civilian. The army tries as much as it can, and it's difficult when you have a deliberately terrorist entity embedded within a civilian population whose sole strategy is to get a high civilian death count. It's difficult to avoid civilian casualties, but it's definitely not the aim of the IDF. But it does happen because war is craziness. It doesn't all happen in slow motion with classical music. That's war, right? As opposed to our enemy who deliberately try, and they have shot to this date an unbelievable amount of missiles. The exact number actually in front of me, I'm going to tell you. And each one of these missiles, the sole aim of these missiles is to destroy and kill thousands of civilians, where we're trying to destroy terrorists. And unfortunately, civilians get killed. And that's a big difference. I've got here's the number. So in the last 1 year, and this is a number, an exact number, from Gaza, 13,200 missiles have been fired. From Lebanon, 13,400 missiles. From Iran, 400 missiles. From Yemen, 180 missiles. From Syria, 60 missiles. If you do the math, that's almost 30,000 missiles being fired towards Israel. And the sole aim of all these missiles is to destroy. If Israel did not have the best air defense system on the planet Earth, there would have been millions of dead Jews. That's what they want to do. They do want to kill civilians. We kill civilians, but it's accidental as we're trying to wipe out this evil entity that is trying to commit a genocide on the Jewish people. So it's a cause and effect has all been reversed in the mainstream media.
Thank you. Gary Ogin. Gary.
Hi, Tuvia. Thanks for your service under horrific circumstances that is war. It's got two short parts, which you've almost pretty much answered in the previous one. But the first one was: are you not at all horrified by the deaths of innocent Palestinians and the impact on the wider Palestinian civilian population, where they've had to move several times, and they must be going through a living hell? The second part is: what does finishing a job look like? You mentioned finishing a job. I mean, what exactly, specifically, will that look like?
Okay, so the answer to question number one is yes. There's not one Israeli soldier I know, myself included, who glorifies the death of civilians. It's an unfortunate thing that happens during warfare. We don't glorify the death of civilians. We don't want the death of civilians, right? Unfortunately, it happens, but it's nothing. That's not a war aim of Israel, as opposed to our enemies, where it's definitely a war aim to destroy as many civilians as possible and murder and kill and maim. That's not our war aim, and no one glorifies in it. We're not dancing in the streets, handing out candies as the Hamas was, when they were parading and torturing kidnapped music festival adoptees and grandparents and babies in Gaza. We don't have that kind of culture. We definitely do not glory in our enemy's death. And finishing off the job time and time again, our war aim to finish off the job is to make sure that every single hostage is returned, both the bodies they're keeping and, more importantly, the live hostage, if any are still alive, to make sure that the 120,000 internally displaced Israelis are returned to their homes in non-political territory. We're talking about the top 5 kilometers of the state of Israel, all the kibbutzim and towns there. And we're talking about the towns outside of Gaza and the kibbutzim. People forget there's 120,000 internally displaced Israelis that's costing the state of Israel a whopping $1 billion shekels a day. That's $330 million a day, housing these displaced. That's our main thing. The return of the hostages, 1. 2, the return of the people to their own homes who live in sovereign Israel. There's no other country on the planet Earth that would take such an internal separation of people from their homes. And finally, of course, the downfall of these death cults, both the Hezbollah in the north and the Hamas in the south, and hopefully their big puppet master of all, which is Iran, who are not supported even by their own people. These are despotic regimes that want nothing more than global jihad and global Islamic terror domination of the planet Earth under Sharia law. So that is really what the world, not just for the Jewish people, but on behalf of Western civilization.
Thank you. Ella Bennett. Ella, can you come off mute, please?
Yeah. Hello there. Hi, Tuvia. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us this evening. It's a real privilege to hear you speak. Just stop my video.
Well done.
Sorry about that. Yes, so thank you for coming to talk to us. I mean, I have quite a few questions, but I'll just go with one or two. So I'm just wondering, with regards to the tunnels that have been such a problem, that you've discovered those in Israel and on the border in Gaza and now in Lebanon as well. Imagining that there are tunnels across the whole of the Middle East, all set up for the same purpose. Do you think you're going to be able to get on top of those and sort of destroy them all, or?
Yeah, well, the tunnels in Lebanon are easy to destroy simply because there's no hostages being kept there. So that's why we could drop 83 tons of bombs on top of Nasrallah and destroy the entire Hezbollah leadership. So we've been doing a really good job in Lebanon, which is basically a mirror contrast of what was happening initially down south last year. Now, the problem with the tunnels, of course, we do have the answer to your question is yes. We have the capability to destroy all the terror tunnels in Gaza. And the only reason we don't, our Achilles heel, which our enemy knew, is the fact that there's still 101 unaccounted for kidnapped Israelis and foreign nationals, by the way, including a UK foreign national. And just about 2 months ago, our intelligence told us that they'd finally located Sinwar, And they knew exactly which tunnel he was in, but they also knew that there was 20 hostages close by. That's why they didn't drop bunker busters on his tunnel, because they didn't want to kill our own hostages as well. And he knows that, and that's when he goes around with hostages. So do we have the capability to destroy all the tunnels in Gaza? Yes. We've destroyed right now about almost half of the tunnels in Gaza. The only reason the other half have not yet been destroyed is they won't be until we manage to locate and retrieve and rescue the hostages, and of course the hostages' bodies as well. So we have the capability, we're just withholding because we actually sanctify life and don't worship death like the death cult we're fighting.
Yeah.
Florette Hyman. Florette, please come off mute.
Right, I'm very, very nervous, so I hope I can ask you what I want to ask you. First of all, I want to give you a bracha that every single one of the soldiers come back safely. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bless you, make your work easy, and that you succeed to have Shalom Shlema in Israel.
Amen.
And it should last forever, because it's about time that wars stopped altogether, because I hate that too. I want to ask you one question. The Red Cross. All over the world, they go around looking for hostages, looking after people who are in, looking after hostages, finding out where the hostages are. Surely they know where our hostages are. Why have they done nothing? And why do they get away with doing nothing towards helping us?
Well, it's a very good question, and it also has a very simple answer, because they actually don't care.
I know.
If they were, that's the simple answer. The only time the Red Cross have been seen in action in this entire conflict is very briefly during the first hostage exchange. They suddenly appeared as if by magic to become glorified taxi drivers. That was it. Any other conflict zone on the planet Earth, the Red Cross is making sure that the kidnapped people are getting care packages as communication. They have made not just zero effort, less than zero efforts, simply because the people who are kidnapped, who are Jews. It's that simple. There's no other answer for that. They don't care.
I just want to tell you, I have experience of the Red Cross, because I'm actually a refugee from Egypt. So we are the forgotten refugees. And the only experience I've had with them is that when my mom went to have her baby in hospital, which she'd never been in hospital in her life, and she had our younger sister, they were emptying our suitcases and giving them to other people when my mum was out. That's what they thought helping us was, just by giving our whatever it is that we've got in our suitcases, giving it out, taking from refugees to other to whoever was there. I don't know what.
Thank you, Florette. Thanks.
Which was horrible as well. But anyway.
Okay, the next question is Elizabeth Belisha. Elizabeth, can you come off mute, and can we see you? Elizabeth. No, if you don't. Oh, yes, you're
Is it?
Yes, we can hear you now. Can we see?
Can you hear me? Okay.
Can we see you?
I don't know how to turn the.
Okay, well, don't worry. Ask your question. Ask the question.
Well, it seems that you have very sophisticated techniques, tools in the medic unit, and I was wondering. I volunteered at Mastrap base in the medical unit, and we were doing medical kits, first aid kits, and also kits for surgeon to be able to operate on the battlefield. And but it seems to me that what we were putting in these kits were quite simple versus what you have really on the field. So I was wondering if what we were making was like a joke, or do you get this package that we make? That we made?
No, quite simply, the tool that we our last resort is to actually operate in the field. We try and stabilize in the field, and we would rather the actual surgery take place in the hospital itself under much more sterile conditions, unless there's no choice. If the airway is blocked and we have to do an emergency trajectory, then we have to do it. We have to do a ventrisection, then we have to do it. There's certain things you need to do in the field. But as far as the actual full-on surgery, we'd rather that take place in the hospital, especially with burns victims. And that's why we want to evacuate them so far. So our main job as a medical evacuation unit is to stabilize the patients enough to keep them stable to get to the hospital, the actual OR itself. But we do have advanced equipment, and that advanced equipment is quite unique to the IDF, and that's why we've had people from the British Army, the American Army, from the medical corps coming in to study our medical evacuation techniques, because it's a game changer, and people from different military forces, from NATO forces, actually coming to see how we managed to do it so efficiently and so fast. Because you might have heard the numbers that there's been 360 holy soldiers killed since last October, since the ground war started. What you don't hear about are the other numbers. There's been 10,000 wounded soldiers. I'll say that number again, 10,000. You don't hear that number simply because they don't die. We managed to save their lives. They're not all physically wounded. Some of them also is psychological as well. So we also have two in-field psychiatrists, psychologists who work with our unit as well. But we're so good and so efficient at saving their lives. Those are the numbers you don't hear. So anyone has to, when they visit Israel, they have to go to a Bet Lochem, and they have to see that these soldiers who sometimes need a lifetime of treatment after the initial wounds.
Thank you. Jake Tash, could you come off mute, please? And can we see you? Jake Tash.
Yeah, thank you. My question is, with Israel currently fighting as it is one of the most moral armies in the world, how come exactly whatever we're trying to do, including giving polio shots to refugees, how come it always gets twisted against us? As in the latest stats, I believe the terrorist civilian death ratio was close to 1.1 to 1.6, when in places such as Afghanistan and Iraq, it was closer to, I believe, 1 to 9. So how come even when the IDF are trying to preserve as much life as possible, it still gets twisted against us and half the world united against trying to support this death cult that we're fighting?
Tuvia.
It's very simple. The answer in one sentence, because the way Israel's reported, it uses double standards. Israel is reported very differently than any other conflict in any other country on the planet Earth. And we're not doing what we do for brownie points or to try and get positive coverage in the BBC. We all know that's never going to happen. Hell could freeze over and the IDF will never get any positive coverage in the BBC. That's not why we're doing it. We're doing it simply because it's the right thing to do. At the end of the day, we need to look at ourselves in the mirror to certainly know that we are doing the most we possibly can to avoid civilian casualties and the most we possibly can to save lives. So that's why we do it. We don't do it for positive press coverage, because as you know, there's certain media outlets will always report Israel positively, and there's certain, which is the vast majority of the mainstream media, from the BBC to CNN to the Washington Post, that will never, ever, ever have anything positive to say about Israel and the Jewish people, simply because they cannot stand strong Jews. That's the bottom line. Just like they like the Jews weak and dead, they don't like them strong, and that's the bottom line. So we're not doing it for brownie points. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Thank you. Christopher
Okay.
Pickford. Christopher.
Hello, my wife and I are great fans of yours, Tuvia. But the question is a simple one, a personal question. What proportion of your time do you spend on duty? Do you do a week on, a week off, or 2 months on, 1 month off?
So in the last year, since the war started last October, this is my third shift. So the first time we were in for about 6 months straight. And then we were off for a couple of months and we're back in for a month and we're off for a month and now I'm back in again. I don't know how long. When we're in, depending on how much we're needed, the rotations are usually like a week in on combat and 2 or 3 days out, and another week in. When we're on, we just don't know. It's war. It's not like a script. Sometimes we can be working non-stop, evacuating wounded day in and day out, night in and night out. And sometimes it can be a relative lull. But even when there's a lull, we're always practicing and training as well. So everyone in my unit are reserves. None of them are between 18 and 20 in the regular army. I'm the oldest person in the unit by a long stretch. But everyone there has got a real life outside of the army. And they have families and they have jobs. And we're going to be as long as it takes. No one could have imagined a year ago we'd still be here over a year later, and if necessary, we'll be here for another year. But I think that the feeling is in the next few months that we're going to get to some type of end of this conflict. That's our sincere hope.
Let's
Thank
hope
you.
so. Astrid Topiol. Astrid.
Hi. Yes, sorry, I'm Maurice. There's Astrid here. My question is the following. Given the fact that a lot of the fighting is taking place in tunnels underground, this must be an incredible complication for your job, effectively. How do you cope with this, complication in terms of actually having access to the wounded and getting them out quickly?
Well, actually, most of the fighting, the wounded we have access to is taking place above ground.
Okay.
The tunnels are used by the terrorists to pop out of and start the conflict, but we're actually evacuating people above ground. We don't go into tunnels to take any of the wounded out.
Thank you. Thank you. Jill Friedman. Jill. And if there's anyone else who's got questions, please could you raise your hands now? We've just got like 10 minutes or so to go. Jill. Jill, could you unmute, please? Okay. Could I then? Oh, yeah, you've unmuted. Can we see you as well?
Yes. I wonder if it's possible to get a recording or a transcript of this discussion to our emails. Are you recording?
We'll be writing to everybody tomorrow with that.
Ah.
Thank you. Georgina Nicholas Jago. Georgina, could you come off mute, please, and ask your question? Hi, Georgina. Can we see you as well?
Yes, I'm trying to undo the video, but it won't. But you're not missing
Right,
it.
let's hear your question.
Trust me. Okay, so I'd like to make a comment and a question. The comment is basically you're so right about the BBC. I think it's disgusting the way they're treating it. And they seem to forget about the Second World War, about the bombing and the Blitz, and not just in England, but in Germany, how many people get killed. And it's a terrible, terrible thing. But unfortunately, innocent people do get killed in a war. So, I mean, I think that is diabolical. GB News are probably the better one to listen to. But my question is more about the United Nations, the UN. What is going on? Yes, he's smiling. Yes, what is going on there?
I can quote Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, who famously said, "We call the United Nations in Hebrew the Amot Muchadot, which is instead of un, we say and he just basically said famously two words, which is shmum, which basically means we don't care. We don't actually care about the United Nations because it's the biggest farce on the planet Earth. And it's just a bunch of totalitarian lunatics who, like Iran, for example, who's on the United Nations Women's Rights Committee. If it wasn't so sad, it'd be funny. And it's all pretty Orwellian. So we don't actually care about the United Nations because they are a biased, anti-Semitic, morally bankrupt organization.
Hear, hear.
Thank you.
Les Bloom and then Sandra Blackman. Ella Bennett, I see your hand up. The others haven't asked the question yet, but I'll come back to you, Ella, afterwards. So Les Bloom, please.
Oh, hi. Well, my question is there something you could do or we could collectively do to encourage more people to fight our cause via social media and indeed say maybe phoning into radio stations and stuff like that? I know there was encouragement to write to MPs, but that's very sort of last century, in my opinion, and it's very ineffective. We're losing the propaganda war, and I just think people should be there fighting the cause on social media. And do you agree? And what can be done to achieve that?
Well, you're 100% right. I mean, there's different ways to fight this war. One, obviously, is to put an olive green uniform on and go and fight the front lines. And what's going on the university campuses, what's going on generally even the Jewish neighborhood is horrific. And I remember I'm dating myself now, but I remember back in Thatcher's days, one of the reasons why Thatcher got such a high profile, because she took this advertising company, some of you might have heard of, called Saatchi and Saatchi,
Oh, yeah.
run by two Iraqi British Jews. and she ran a very successful campaign. So instead of people complaining about how Israel has a terrible PR, they're not very successful putting its course across, which is a mixed kind of accusation that we have better, some spokesmen are better than others, or spokeswomen. I personally think the diaspora Jews, if they're so concerned, and they should be concerned about what's happening right now, should be using some of their money to get these private PR companies who that's their entire role in getting positive PR out. I know that in the tube stations in London just last week, there was a very successful campaign of posters describing what was going on in the underground, in the Hamas terror underground in Gaza, which we all know is much larger than the entire tube system together. So if you went into the tube on October the 7th, you might have noticed some of the pro-Israel posters with different colors, just like the different tube lines, talking about what's going on. We need a lot more of that. Writing letters.
Jacqueline Waltz, where the experience is coming.
We have some background noise here.
No, it's gone now. Carry on.
Okay, so you're right. Writing letters to the MP is very antiquated, very 1980s. But the best thing to do is to get professional companies, professional PR companies, and they cost money, and to get Israel's point out. At the end of the day, just like on a college campus, you can have 10% of people that love Israel. Doesn't matter what you say. They know Israel's not perfect. They're going to love Israel. So you don't need to speak to them. You're going to get 10% of people who hate Israel. Whatever you say, doesn't matter how rational or logical you are, they're still going to hate Israel. So your target audience will be that 80% in the middle. They're quite clueless. So posting stuff on your Facebook or on your Instagram that all your friends read doesn't really help Israel's case, because they're all in the same bubble as you are, which is the pro-Israel bubble. Our target audience should be the 80% of clueless people who know nothing about the Middle East and have no understanding. Because our enemies basically follow the Goebbels doctrine, which is called the great or the big lie. Get the same line repeated over and again until people say, well, it must be right. Can the whole world be wrong and the Jews right? And the answer is yes. Over and over again, the answer is yes. But we need to reach that audience.
Thank you. Sandra Blackman, please. Please come off mute, and if we can see you, that'd be lovely. Sandra Blackman.
I have a bad throat. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
You have a bad throat, but I have a good ear, so we can hear you.
I would like to believe that Israel is independent in its manufacture of tanks and armaments. To what proportion would you say that Israel is in fact independent, or is this secret information that you shouldn't give out?
No, unfortunately, then we're not 100% independent. We were till around 2000, and the then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak went and closed down many of our own homegrown arms industries and outsourced it to the United States. In retrospect, that was a mistake, especially when you have less sympathetic governments in the United States who are not so enthusiastic to hand some of the defensive weapons that we need over to us. So in retrospect, one of the big lessons is also learned from this war is to go back to the pre-2000 situation where we were responsible for manufacturing the vast majority of our arms. We can't rely on sometimes our allies, which are not so allied to us, for our own defensive arms.
Thank you. And the last question, Ella Bennett. Ella. And thank you for coming back a second time, Ella. Okay.
So my last question, yes, sorry for Tuvia. Have you got enough soldiers to see this war through to the end, wherever the end may be?
Better have.
So that question, basically, it's very interesting. So I was going to finish with a similar question, which I noticed someone had asked on the chat. Soldiers we have enough of, because we also rotate around as well. Just recently, my unit, we just recruited 40 new people in our unit, doctors, paramedics, combat medics. Someone asked a similar question on the chat over here, which I was just leafing through, which is how can UK Jews help the most right now? Now, what is needed most now? And as it sounds unbelievable, still, this is a year into the war, what's needed most now is actually equipment for some of these soldiers, frontline battle equipment. So far, people ask how they can help. So one is on the PR front. You might not know this, but the IDF has got the reserve units, $1.5 billion of donated equipment is being used by frontline soldiers as well. And when you recruit new soldiers to your unit, they're still short of equipment as well. So if anyone wants to PR to PM me after this, I can give you people who would help get equipment to frontline soldiers. I think that's the most critical way that the UK Jews can help, in addition to the social media campaigns, reaching people who are not just your friends who love Israel anyway, but also to actually get equipment to frontline soldiers. This is what's called in Hebrew Melchemet Mitzvah, or moral law. And by giving equipment to soldiers, you're actually doing something called Pikuach Nefesh, which is literally saving lives. As those soldiers right now, especially in the forces where I'm serving with, are going into Gaza to try and locate those last 101 hostages and end this war and defeat the terrorist darkness forces of Hamas. So I would say the PR war, spreading the light amongst people who don't think like us, and also using the power of your pocket to provide equipment to the IDF to help us finish the war for not just the Jewish people, but the entire Western world. Because Iran says Israel's just a little Satan, the big Satan's the United States of America. So with the war we're fighting, and in my unit we have Jews and non-Jews, we have Christians and Jews as well, it's a war for the future of the Western world against fundamental radical Islam. So that's how you can help. And ideally, you could help by coming over, doing IDF basic training and joining the IDF, and not everyone's capable of doing that. So another way to do that is to make sure that we have the optimum equipment needed to complete this war of light against darkness.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just one final question. Les Bloom. Can you come off mute, please, Les? Can you come off mute?
Oh, no, I asked my question. I think my hand's still raised by mistake.
Okay, my apologies.
Okay.
In which case, in a moment, I'm just going to thank Dr. Tuvia Book on behalf of all of us. I just want to announce future meetings. On the 7th of November, which I believe is a Thursday, we have Major Andrew Fox talking to us about the lies and the legal issues regarding Israel, the lies against Israel, how we're going to fight the lies, and of course, the way the media is attacking Israel. What are we going to do about it? And I think that will be a very interesting meeting. We'll circulate the details shortly. In fact, it's already been circulated in our members' newsletter. We're going to have several other events this year, at least one of them, probably two of them might be face-to-face in person, so we get to meet each other. And we will, of course, keep everybody notified of these events. And our next trip to Israel will be in January, where we hope we will have the services of Tuvia to guide us as well. So we keep in touch. We've got plenty of activities and other events coming up in the near future. Now it gives me, oh yes, one other thing is membership. Our membership scheme has changed. We're now, we're not going to, our existing members will become members for life. We're not going to be collecting subscriptions. What we are doing is we're going to invite new people to join, and there'll be a one-off subscription, which is £18 for life. You join the NGA for the cost of £18, you're a member for life. You won't be asked for more money, unless, of course, you wish to donate more money. And if you're under the age of 30, it's £5 for life. So the whole objective of what we're trying to do, we have almost 700 members now. We're trying to massively increase the membership numbers, and we're more interested in getting more members than collecting the money, because that enables us to speak with far more importance and hold bigger events as well. Okay, so now I just want to thank Tuvia on behalf of all of us so much for giving up his time this evening.
Yeah.
We always say that Israel is strong, Israel is resilient. What Tuvia has been saying helps to prove it for those people who are not so well acquainted with what Israel is doing, to actually understand what we're doing to support our wounded soldiers and to support Israel's the IDF in the field is fantastic. And it helps to prove the point to everyone that we are strong, we are resilient, and we're going to win this war. My personal view is the war will only ultimately be won when there is regime change in Iran, but we can do a lot towards making that happen in the near future, certainly with victory over Hamas and Hezbollah. So Tuvia, thank you so much once again. You're a true friend to the National Jewish Assembly. And we really look forward to seeing you again in the near future, hopefully in Israel. Thank you, Tuvia.